Have you ever found yourself partway through a 3.5 hour Kingsfield retrospective and thought, oh man, I should try this game out, only to boot up your PlayStation 1 and legally acquired physical media to find that actually playing the game feels like slamming your dick in a car door? I know I have. So there I was, covered in blood and smooth as a Ken doll, thinking, if only I could find a game that captures that same magic, but with a few modern conveniences. Well, I found that game, and if you've got a few minutes, I'll tell you about it and why I liked it, while trying to avoid spoilers because I think it's worth playing for yourself. Lunacid is a first-person dungeon crawler with a crunchy, lo-fi PS1 aesthetic, and if that sounds familiar, it's because I was halfway through working on this video before Top Hat reached out about Labyrinth of the Demon King. The game describes itself as a spiritual successor to the Kingsfield and Shadow Tower series, and if you don't know what those are, then oh boy, do I have about 20 hours of retrospective videos for you. But the Cliff Notes version is that they were made by Fromsoft so long ago that their logo looked like this. If you're a fan of the Souls games, then Lunacid probably still has enough of a shared ancestral DNA for you to find something that you'll like, as long as you're not one of those weirdos who can't bear to play a game with a character who has anime eyes. Anyway, the game opens with just a sprinkle of lore. The Great One rises from the ocean, spraying poison and melting the moon somehow. This miasma leaves humanity in a new dark age, clinging on to the edge of extinction. It's my favorite kind of game world, a miserable shithole sparsely populated with the empty husks of a civilization gasping its last feeble breath.
Hey, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
What do you mean you've seen this?
Yeah, I know, but it's not like FromSoft invented existential nihilism. In the face of this world-ending threat, the splintered factions of society finally put aside their differences and joined forces for the good of everyone. Nah, I'm just messing with you. They start killing each other and throw everyone they don't like down a big hole. You are one such person, but I don't think you're the one from the opening cutscene because that dude's hand gets chopped off. But if you use a bow and arrow in the game, then it'll show that you still have that hand, so solve that mystery, Vadi. It doesn't really matter who you used to be because you're going to create a character and the class you choose doesn't really affect much other than your starting stats and these resistances at the bottom. Any character can use any equipment or spell in the game, there's no minimum requirement for any of it, but better stats make things more effective. Strength is for melee damage, intelligence is for spells, resistance gets rid of status effects like poison faster. You've played a video game before, right? I probably don't have to tell you all of this, but there is also a speed stat, and I would recommend getting this to at least 20 or 30 early on. It's the difference between a dungeon crawl and a dungeon sprint. Dexterity is for ranged weapons, but it also affects how high you jump, which can be really useful when you're exploring, but it's not mandatory if you don't mind taking the long route and missing some things. Believe it or not, you level up by killing stuff and going back to a save crystal, but I promise I'm telling you this for a reason. Touching a crystal refills your health and mana, which is nice because your mana doesn't recharge passively, but unlike Dark Souls, that touch doesn't respawn enemies. They only come back when you load into an area so you can save some consumables and your progress without having to start all over. And I think that's a pretty considerate design, especially when you realize that there's no Estus flask, so those healing potions can be a lot more precious. Once you finally clear a level out, you won't have to worry about things respawning behind you, and you can focus on what really matters, which is rubbing your face all over the wall textures looking for this little question mark icon. That icon means there's a secret wall, and oh baby, do I love a good secret wall. That sense of exploration is what really drug me into the deep end of Lunacid. Puttering around the early areas, it didn't take long to get that familiar feeling from the early Souls games. You know, the one where you stop in a dark hallway and you turn around and you realize that you've been walking for a long time and you haven't seen a bonfire. With each enemy you kill, that tension gets a little higher. You start eyeing your healing items and wondering if you should turn back, but then you pull a lever or smack a wall, and suddenly you're back somewhere familiar. That dopamine hit is all over this game, and it's backed up by one of the best soundtracks I've heard in years. It runs the spectrum from chill lo-fi beats to some slightly uncanny dungeon funk, like you stretched a rubber band in slow motion and then reversed it or something. I believe the kids would call it a vibe, but I talk about video games. I'm not a vibe rater, so I don't really have a great musical vocabulary to break it down with. The OST is on YouTube if you want to check it out on its own. I'll put a link in the description. A little curiosity and determination will take you far, but maybe not all the way to the end of the game. There's no downcast knight in the Nexus going,
You should check out the poison swamp. I hear there's a door there that leads straight to your mom's house.
Some of these level layouts are both massive and kind of samey. I guess that's just a side effect of the low-fidelity art style, and to me it's not worth missing out on the rest of the game because I got tired of walking around in circles. If you hit a point where you really don't know what the game wants you to do, I don't think there's any shame in getting some help online. The user Boreal has some really nice maps on the Steam forums that can show you where you might have missed a door, but I would hold off until you sense a disturbance in the force because they also include all of the secrets. It would be fair to say that Lunacid has been one of my favorite games of the last few years. It runs great on the Steam Deck, and I do solidly recommend it, but as always, it's important that I also tell you the things I didn't love so much. For one, I had terrible screen tearing when I first started the game, and for some reason the fix was to set the frame rate to be uncapped in the settings. I also had a weird problem where I couldn't move in the water at all on my first playthrough. I left the area for a while, leveled up a few times, and when I came back, my character had learned to swim for some reason. Sometimes enemies get stuck looking the wrong way, or they'll lose track of you entirely. And I had a handful of crashes that lost me some progress, and there was an NPC that wouldn't give me a spell because every time I tried to talk to him, it would reset the timer that I was supposed to be waiting for. They were all little things, and when I remembered that this entire game was basically made by one person, I really don't fault it in the slightest. At this point, you know everything you need to get started with Lunacid, and if you wanted to go in blind, this is where I would recommend you jump out of the video. But I do have a few first playthrough tips if you'd like to hear them. I'll still try to avoid spoilers. If you're struggling to pick a class, I started with the Shinobi. It gives you a decent base speed and resistances, as well as a small boost to dexterity. You might appreciate that in the early game where magic is limited and a ranged weapon can save you a lot of headache. You can get a crossbow from the Crow and Wing's Rest and upgrade it, but I think dexterity kind of falls off in the later levels as enemies become more resistant to non-elemental damage. Some players will recommend a magic build, and they are correct that magic is incredibly powerful in the game, but for a first timer I would still recommend the dexterity dip at first because you won't know where all the fun spells are, and it also will help you with exploration because of the jump height. You can go the blood magic route, and the health you use for those spells does come back over time, but it also means that you're making your glass cannon even more brittle so that it can shoot more often, and that might be rough for a first playthrough. Allegedly, leveling your resistance to 100 causes your mana to recharge over time, but I haven't gotten my mage character that far yet. There are a few wands that shoot magic, but they still use dexterity for their damage calculation, and it can be difficult to get a good mix of reliable elemental damage, so by the end of the game, I was tossing in more spells to kind of keep up. Melee is totally viable, but it's a lot more dangerous, especially if you do it in conjunction with the next part. Lunacid is probably the only game I've ever played that actually takes into account the phase of the real moon and uses it to influence the game. Most of what it does is pretty subtle, but the one that matters for this conversation is the lunacy mechanic. Every time you cast a spell, you gain lunacy and it resets to 0 when you touch a save crystal. The closer your current system date is to a real-world full moon, the more lunacy you get per cast, and the higher your lunacy gets, the more damage you take from enemies, but the more XP you get for killing them as well. Combine that with the blood magic I mentioned earlier, and you could be getting a lot more XP per kill, so if you're a min-maxing little shit like I am, you can set your system clock to the date of a real-world full moon for a quick leg up early in the game. Some weapons also gain experience as you use them, and you'll know because they have this bar in the menu. Once it's full, you can upgrade them in Wing's Rest by dipping them in oil. You get weapon XP for using them, not just to hit enemies, but also for breaking objects in the levels. This can come in really handy in the second area where you'll get a wooden torch and you can just break urns until it's upgraded to the iron torch, which is much better at setting mummies on fire for some easy levels. Once you get the ability to make your own coffins, you can also break those for weapon XP, and if you find a nice corner to stand in, you can spawn a big pile of them on top of yourself for lazy weapon upgrading, or if you're chasing the get all the weapons in the game achievement, but that's only something to worry about if you get really hooked on the game like I was. I mean, I went and found mods that made more enemies spawn for my second and third characters just so I could level them up faster, and that's not really something I would ever do. Anyway, that's all I've got for this one. If you think it might be for you, give it a chance. It goes on Steam for less than $15. My first playthrough took under 10 hours, but I was on my first character for closer to 20 getting every achievement just because I didn't want to put it down, and then I started new characters. If it gets its hooks in you, there's also a free prequel called Lunacid, Tears of the Moon that was built in one of the original Kingsfield engines. And I've read rumblings of future DLC plans, but there doesn't appear to be a solid date for that as of this writing. I guess I'll just have to keep an eye out for my next fix. I've got a couple of other videos that are nearly done. I'm not sure what order they'll come out in yet, but I've got a time loop puzzle game, a shooter from the 360 era, and one that's more of an essay about Monster Hunter that might go on the other channel. I'm not really sure yet. It's kind of annoying trying to keep them separated, so I might just give up on that idea and bring that stuff back over here, but I don't know. We'll see what happens. Until then, as always, thanks for watching. Later.